This is going to sound like I'm treating you like a museum piece.
I am a museum piece. Please, bring it.
And you are one of the best-selling authors in America. You have had numerous big prizes, translated into 30 languages, hit after hit in the bestseller list. And I love the fact that I'm making you blush.
And my instinct is to be like, no, it's actually not as good as all that. You're not interviewing John Grisham.
But it really is as good as all that. Did you always know this is what you were going to do?
Well, I would say yes if you were talking about writing. I would say no if you were talking about writing successfully. I had a very la boheme vision of myself when I was young. And I thought I would write, but that no one would ever read what I wrote. I never thought about this life, ever.
Why not? Why didn't you think you were going to be successful?
Because I wanted to make art and I wanted to write literary fiction, and I just never associated that with success. Also, when I was a child, I never thought about writers being alive because the people that we read were dead. I just didn't think that you could make art and be successful. Never occurred to me.
And did you think of this? Did you have in your mind as well a bookshop, and now you own Parnassus and have become a fixture in Nashville? Was that also part of your vision for yourself?
Absolutely.
Supporting other authors?
Absolutely not. No. This came about because the bookstores in Nashville had closed. I met a woman named Karen Hayes who said, I'm interested in partnering, or I said, I don't know. We came up with the idea over the course of lunch as total strangers that we would partner and open a bookshop together. And she would be the owner manager and I would be the silent partner who funded it. And that changed. It wasn't that I wanted to open a bookstore. It was that I didn't want to live in a city that didn't have a bookstore and somebody needed to do it. And it seemed civic. And then a couple of years ago, Karen retired. And so now I own the whole bookstore. So no, I really fell into it backwards. And it's been a wonderful thing. It's been a huge joy, but I was never somebody who thought someday a bookstore.
How would you describe your novels? If you were looking up on high from Ann Patchett and the body of her work, some people have asked me to describe how I would describe your novels. And I thought, well, I'll ask you how you would describe them.
Right. A group of people are thrown together and they have to work things out because they are stuck. I like a desert island scenario. My first novel was set in a home for unwed mothers. Bel Canto, set in a terrorist situation where people can't leave the house. Magician's assistant, they're stuck in a snowstorm. I mean, again and again, State of Wonder, they're down in the Amazon in this place that nobody can get to or get out of. I like people in confinement. And so they have to kind of keep going back to each other until they can work out their problems.
So it's about the relationships more than the setting?
Yes, definitely. The setting is the fun. The setting is the frosting. And I can just design it and change it. But it is always the relationships.
How are people reading in a world where our attention span is so scattered, fragmented among 50 different apps and podcasts and news channels? And has it changed the way we read?
I'm sure it has, but back to when Karen and I were opening the store and everyone was saying, this is insane. I remember we found a space that we really wanted to rent, and the person who owned the property said, oh, I would never rent to a bookstore. Bookstores are dead. You guys are going to go out of business in 6 months. We've been great. When we opened the store, it never occurred to us to have a romance section. And then, I don't know how many years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, we had a shelf. We had one shelf of romance, and now we have a whole section of romance, a big section of romance. And that's true of all my friends who own bookstores all over the country, there are always going to be people who want to read. And that is the fact, that there isn't any one truth about the way people are, how they get their entertainment, how they get their education, and they all want a book. So that's wonderful, because there are people who are still going to be reading on their phones. There are people who aren't reading at all, but history is full of people who didn't read at all. I'm only here to serve the people who still want to read a book.
Do you think people come to you, Anne, in the context of kind of not of escapism, but of seeing good in people or good in humanity? I love your novels because people are um, people are nice to each other generally. I mean, you get a couple of bad guys along the way, but not terribly many mean people. Do you is that in the world we live in, where you look at the news out there and it is pretty grim? Is that are you conscious of giving people a more optimistic view
No,
of humanity?
it's the world I see. I look out through my own eyes, and if I'm reading the news, I can see lots and lots of horrible things. But the people that I interact with every day, and I'm really wondering if this is true for you as well, are really kind people. Every day. The people I work with here at the bookstore, my friends, the people who come into the bookstore, the people that I see in the grocery store, the people that I see in my neighborhood, my neighbors who I love. So there is so much kindness, decency, thoughtfulness that I don't see represented often enough in fiction. And it's not like, oh, I want to step in to fill the gap. But in that sense, I am writing from experience. And I, I find I get a lot of flack about this, that I'm writing fairy tales, or that I'm out of touch, or I don't know what a terrible world we live in. But every day I go out and I walk my dog, and the people that I see are so kind. So shouldn't that also be represented? The nice thing about my job is it's not like I write a novel and that is the one novel for the year. I'm just a little tiny chip in all of the books that are written. So if you want a book about a princess dating a dragon, I can show you what section to go to. If you want a retelling of Huckleberry Finn, I can put that book in your hand. I am not all books, but I am this book. And in my world, there probably is more kindness than you might see in other books, but not more kindness than you might see in your daily life.
And you've never been tempted to think, actually, I'm going to write dark? Or do you think you couldn't write dark if you wanted to because it's not what you see?
I'm not very good at dark. I'm really not very good at villains at all. And there are very few of them in my books. In the Dutch House, that was an interesting story. So I was interviewing Zadie Smith, and Swing Time had just come out, and my book Commonwealth had come out. And Commonwealth is a very autobiographical novel, and Swing Time appeared to be an autobiographical novel. So I was asking Zadie about it, and she was saying autobiographical fiction isn't what has happened to us. It's what we're afraid of happening. It's what we fixate on and think about and worry about. And in that moment, I thought, what am I afraid of? Who am I afraid of being? What do I think about all the time? I'm afraid of being a bad stepmother. I'm actually a really good stepmother, I think. But I've always been so afraid of doing anything that would make my husband's children have a harder life, because I love them. And I could immediately imagine a character who was a terrible stepmother and manipulative and rage-filled and horrible, because that was my fear. And so Andrea, the character of the stepmother in the Dutch house, is probably my best villain.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I tapped into the well of my villainous self. That's what I just need to do.
But only once.
I'll do it again.
You wrote 3 books before you had a major success.
Yes.
I'm always interested in how people keep going. We interviewed Ken Follett for another series, and he also wrote numerous books that had no success at all, but he kept going until he had a success. What was it after you'd written 3 books that didn't sell particularly well? What I think I'd have given up, Anne. I think
No, let me explain it to you.
Many people would have given, most people would have given up.
No, that's not true. Many people who had written 3 novels that they had not been able to publish would have given up.
Right.
But I was doing great. I mean, again, the secret to happiness is low expectations. Yeah. And so I never thought that I would have any success. The fact that I had sold 3 books and made enough money to survive in a 1-room apartment, I was fantastic. I was king of the world. So, and I would get invited to festivals. I had teaching jobs. I was doing great. I was what you call a mid-list author. It wasn't
Look at
any,
me.
yeah, exactly. It wasn't anything like, oh, I thought that I would give up. Or nor did I think I'm going to keep writing until I get my big breakthrough book. It wasn't that.
When you then wrote Bel Canto, and it was this huge success, how did that change your expectations for your future novels? Did that in a way land you with this proposition of success that you had to keep fulfilling?
So Bel Canto sold as well as my first 3 books when it was in hardback. People will come into the store all the time clutching an old hardback copy of Bel Canto, and they'll say, it's a first edition. And I'll say, they're all first editions, because there wasn't a second printing in hardback. They were only first editions. And then in paperback.
Because it wasn't an instant success.
Gosh, no. Right. Then in paperback, the book really took off and sold so well. And then,
what changed between hardback and paperback apart from the price?
It was 9/11.
Right.
And in the same way, it was The Kite Runner and Bel Canto. Those were the 2 books that really exploded in relation to September 11th, because book clubs wanted to read about terrorism. So, of course, what would you go to but a book about an opera singer being held captive in a giant mansion? And they wanted to read about Afghanistan, and they read The Kite Runner. Just not at all related to reality. But that was the thing that made the book a success. And I don't in any way feel like, oh, I wrote 3 mediocre books and then I wrote a really good one. It's just the luck of the draw, how things change. And so a lot of people said to me, how were you able to write another book after that? Nobody's watching. I'm not curing cancer. I'm not a 14-year-old girl on Instagram selling mascara to 20 million people. It's literary fiction. So I can do whatever I want. There's no pressure.
You don't have a smartphone. You showed me your flip phone that you don't even know the number to, and it isn't charged anyway, so I'm not quite sure why you carry it in your bag. And even your husband doesn't know the number, so that's pretty useless. You don't look at websites much apart from a little bit of research. You don't watch television. I don't, this is going to sound like I'm treating you like a museum piece.
I am a museum piece. Please bring it.
You're a bit of a, we're going to, try and get Ann Patchett and give her to future generations when our minds are completely fried by
stuff her, put her in the Natural History Museum. Yes.
What's your day like? I mean, and you obviously your husband has a smartphone, so you know what his day is like. How does your day compare to other people all of us who have these and look at websites? And I mean, what's it like living in your world? How do you get, how do you go traveling? How do you?
I feel sometimes like I am the survivor of the zombie apocalypse, especially when I'm in New York and I'm walking down the street and every single person is doing this. When I look around in other cars and everyone is looking at their phone while they're driving their car, it's terrifying. But I really sound so stupid. Now, when do you look at trees? When do you notice the natural world? When do you think, I want to do my best to protect the natural world because I am a part of it. I am a part of the planet. I am a part of my community. No, you're not. You're just walking around looking at the palm of your hand. So in that sense, I think my day is really quite different. I mean, yeah, I just spend my whole life making things harder for myself. But I also write novels, and I am very interested in protecting my brain and not just constantly being interrupted. I've never texted. That seems like a really bad idea, texting. Just, I don't want people to be able to get me all the time. Okay, here's a story. It all goes back to my stepfather, my mother's second husband, who is the person that I grew up with, who I really loved, but was a very, very weird guy. And he was a doctor, and he gave my mother a pager, the first pager ever, so that when she was out, and this was the 70s, he would beep her and she would have to find a gas station with a payphone and call him because he wanted to know where she was. Okay, so that's one early childhood trauma that made me think I don't want a cell phone. Two, we all had guns. So my stepfather would say, if you're driving, you have to have a gun in the car because you won't be safe. And so when I was in high school, I always had a gun in the car. Back when it was illegal to have a gun in the car. 16, Catholic schoolgirl uniform and a gun in the glove compartment. And then people will say to me now, it's not safe for you to drive without a phone. It's not safe for you to be a woman out in the world without a phone. And my voice thinks, or a gun. I mean, either way, I have no interest in owning a gun. I would never own a gun. But if the chips were down and I had a choice between a phone and a gun, right? That's the world I came from. So I don't want people to be able to find me. I don't want to shoot anyone. No phones, no guns.
Do we all seem like kind of addicts to you?
Yeah, actually, yes. And the fact that it's not discussed as an addiction is bizarre. So nobody wants to get rid of the thing that they love. Nobody, if somebody has a profound engagement with books, they have no interest in banning books, right? So if you love the internet and you love your phone, you're not going to say, these things really aren't good for kids. This is really addictive. This is a bad idea, because then it's going to come back on you.
Bring it back to your novels. Will there be a point at which you are writing novels, particularly if you write novels in the present, about characters who have a whole, today everybody has an online life, and your characters won't, because you don't know that life?
Oh, I write about all sorts of things I don't know. That's not limiting at all. Pretty much
advantage of
every
being a
single
fiction
thing
writer.
I write is about something I don't know. But phones really are the death of narrative plot, if you think about it, because your character can get in touch with anyone. They can get the answer to anything. And so what drives the narrative? And it is true that I'm always working to get rid of my characters' phones. I'm writing a novel right now in which the character is in this terrible storm and she gets sick and she doesn't charge her phone, and she's quite young. And so she's in New York and all of these things keep happening to her, but she doesn't have her phone because it's dead. So you have to do things like that.
So you're writing technology out of your fiction?
As best I can. But really, that's not just me. Most novelists will say, it is very, very hard if the character can find anyone and connect with anyone to get the plot going. Do you remember dating? Do you remember dating before phones? And you know,
I've only ever dated without phones, I have to say, because I'm now so
oh, that's
old
true.
that
Well,
I never had that.
I'm older than you are, miss. But you would make a date.
Yeah.
And then you would go to the restaurant. Maybe the person wouldn't be there, and then you would have to find a payphone, and then you would call them, but you'd get the answering machine, and then somebody would call, and you'd punch a series of numbers to check your answering machine. All of those things made life so much more interesting.
Do you feel some of the authors I have interviewed have felt a pressure to come up with books, with novels on a regular basis, particularly authors who work in the sort of thriller space, more
Sure.
popular fiction than literary fiction?
Right.
Do you feel under pressure to keep producing novels
No.
on a schedule?
No. No. Again, who cares, really? Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird. Everybody was just fine with just that one novel. You don't need more. I mean, people read them, and I'm very grateful. But if I never wrote another book again, the world would keep going just fine. I do it because I love to do it. It's my privilege to do it. But I don't feel any pressure. I never sell a book until it's finished, and nobody reads it until it's finished, and it's finished when I call my editor and said, oh, I finished a book today, I'm going to send it to you.
Can you ever imagine not writing books?
Yes, sure. I would miss it, but I think about that a lot. When I'm complaining, when I'm saying, it's so hard, I'm so frustrated with myself. I worked 8 hours and I got 2 pages today. Could I just be a little more productive? And then I think, or I could stop. You're here because you want to be here. I've got plenty of money, I've got a bookstore, I've got a great life. I don't need to go on and do this forever. And that's a good reality check. I do it because I want to do it.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was great.